Welcome to a somewhat delayed episode of the Weaver's Web broadcast. This rabbit trail is a little bit of a more difficult discussion, as may be obvious by the title. So here's just a little bit of a preview content warning that there will obviously be discussions of a complicated manner around grief, avoidance, and parental woundings, along with a good deal of tear transmutation. Please be sure that you are able to explore this episode with the nuance, respect, and presence that it deserves. Happy listening. Well, it's been exactly 2 months since my mom passed. 2 months feels like both an absurd amount of time, like it can't possibly have been 2 months already, and like it's at the same time been the longest 2 months. Time certainly has a flexible and personalized flow these days, depending on the currents that you're swimming in. My relationship with my mother is infinitely complex. I'm sure many others can relate to that feeling that their relationship with one or both of their caregivers is a hodgepodge mashup of emotions and perceptions. I find that oftentimes our families or the people we grow up with are the ones who challenge us to develop more nuanced and complicated relationships, more intricate relationships and interactions and approaches to our emotional depth. Because there's very few people these days, I think, that can classify their relationships with their parents as a simple, straightforward, benefic love. Just a pure wholeheartedness, like that. It's just without intricacy, without complications, without contradictions. But my relationship with my parents And I suppose specifically my mom was full of contradictions. One of the trickier parts of this grieving journey has been grieving how much I missed her and loved her, and grieving how little had changed with her death, and that I was more grieving the potential of what I could have missed than the reality of my experience with her. You see, I was low contact with my family. Pretty close to no contact with extended family, but low contact with my parents. I remember my mom was the first one. The first person I told that I wasn't straight. We were driving down the road, down in North Carolina, visiting relatives, I believe. And she makes some, I can't even remember what exactly she said, but it was some smart-ass something about queer people. Now, it wasn't something that they commonly discussed. They weren't outwardly, constantly, they weren't berating queer people all the time. It wasn't a dialogue that they were constantly bringing up. It was almost an odd thing when they would bring it up. It was more so like they just pretended that queerness did not exist than anything else. And I forgot exactly what she had said, but I remember that my response, I basically was like, well, I think at the time I said, well, what if I am bisexual? And at the time, I think I was maybe finishing up high school, transitioning to college, perhaps. But I do remember, as soon as I said that, she swerved the car and almost ran into a tree because she was so shocked and appalled. And then she pretty much acted like it didn't happen. I think she might have said, "Don't say that." But for the most part, never brought it up again. Only to find out years later, after her death, that she had called back home because it was just me and her visiting the relatives, I think, that time. And she had called home ranting and raving later to my dad, and my brother had overheard about me saying that. Which only hurt worse when I think about in college, when I was getting ready to graduate college, and I told them, by the way, my partner is going to be here. My ex at the time, who at the time was using she, her pronouns. And I remember being on the phone telling them that. And my mom acting as if this was the first she had ever heard of my queerness. And how much it had hurt for her to try to act like this was new information to her, when she was the first person I had ever told. I used to bitterly joke that it was awfully ironic that she was more hateful to and judgmental around queerness than even my father, who was the actual preacher. Though I guess he certainly avoided the conversation skillfully. But he also didn't necessarily treat me differently either. After I graduated college, and I had to tell my parents that I am actually not coming home after graduation. I'm moving to DC with my partner at the time. That I rarely heard from them, especially her, for almost a year, because she felt so betrayed. But eventually came around to awkward acceptance, I guess we could say, where we could talk around the subject and check in. But it wasn't until it wasn't until I got engaged that I got more than just, it went beyond just awkward avoidance. I was obviously with the partner that I am with now. At this point, a few years later, I've been with Whit for about 3 years at this point when we got engaged. Several years later, I'd also moved back from DC back down to the area. At the time, I was only living about an hour away from them. But I remember when we got engaged, it took me, I think, almost a month to get up the nerve to tell them. Not like they didn't know I was in a relationship, or at this point, it was very obvious that I was queer. They had never once met a partner of mine who was cis or straight. I had one of those, but they technically never met them. I can't even remember if they know about me dating them or not. I can't remember. But I remember I was actually on FaceTime with them this time. And I was actually on FaceTime with Mom. And my dad was kind of wandering around the background. And I showed her my ring. She let out a holler to Dad. And it was wild how she had the audacity to act shocked and betrayed. But what was worse was after I got off the phone. Keep in mind, no words of congratulations. But over the next couple of months, I started getting these texts from her all hours of the day and night. They would just pop up. Usually at the worst time. Telling me how she really needed her angel girl to reconsider and to read the Bible and to not make this mistake. And just bringing up going to hell and all this other stuff. Until finally, I ended up texting her one day and telling her that if she wanted to salvage any type of relationship with me at all, that I didn't want her to text me again. Until I had time to process and work through some of this. She also didn't realize that as she was doing all this, she was also uninviting herself from my wedding. It ended up being a little bit more of an elopement. And we want to do a 5 or 10 year proper ceremony at some point, but it was about a month before the wedding when I finally had to tell her to stop texting me. And it would be about another year. It would be almost another year until we really spoke again. When they finally got angry enough at my lack of contact. And as they pulled up in the area, they drove to where I lived to basically confront me, swearing that they had never loved me any differently. And while they didn't agree, they still wanted to be in my life and all these other things. But never once apologizing. So we transitioned from basically no contact to low contact. I won't lie, a lot of it was because they were getting so much older. my mom had always had health issues, at least for like the last decade. And at this point, I'd already missed a couple of grandparents' funerals, which I was basically no contact with them. They hadn't seen fit to reach out at any point. So, I wasn't totally torn up about that, but a lot of the reason for the low contact instead of no contact was because I knew they were getting older. And I wanted to minimize regret. And I still wanted to at least be kept up to date with health issues and major stuff. And so, for the next couple of years, we played that low contact avoidance game that I'm learning our Ancestral line is so good at playing. We're about once every couple of months talk on the phone, get the roll call of the different doctor's appointments and check-ins, and but I hadn't seen them since that time they rolled up to confront me a few years ago. And that brings us to this year. I think I talked to her once, maybe twice this year. Texted a few times. But it had also been a really rough year. Wade had had top surgery, and I hadn't even wanted to get into all that with my parents. They barely would even ask about Wade. So when he had his surgery and we were back and forth and dealing with complications and then he lost his job as soon as he came back from an FMLA. And then because of everything that had been happening the last few months, I lost my car. And that was all leading up to basically Mother's Day. About three or four solid months of just one thing after the other. So I didn't call her on Mother's Day. I just texted her. I was so raw and vulnerable and just mentally drained and distraught from everything that had been going on. That I just... all I had the energetic capacity to do was text her. And then I find out she's in the hospital. The same week or weekend, I was going to try a take two, a belated Mother's Day call. I find out she's in the hospital. Which I later find out she had been in the hospital for a couple of days before I was even told she had been hospitalized. And I call her and I can tell that things are not looking good. I expected, from what it sounded like, she was about to be going on to hospice. She was in late stage heart and kidney failure. And they were going to see what the meds they were going to give her were going to do. And then it sounded like she was probably going to be going home on hospice care. And so, like I said, we had just lost a car like a week or two before this. And so, Whit was still out of work. I had only been able to work but so much this year because of just everything going on. So I was trying to scramble and figure out how to finagle a vehicle or a ride down into North Carolina. It was a few hours drive. So I was trying to figure out how to, get down there. I talked to them on Wednesday. I was like, well, let me know as soon as y'all know what's happening. Let me know as soon as there's an update of any type. Let me know. And I didn't hear from them the next day. And then I woke up Friday morning to a FaceTime call. Of everybody standing around her bed. And she was hooked up to machines. I could hardly understand what she was saying. The only thing I heard for sure was that she loved me. And that she was sorry. And more that I may never know exactly what she was trying to get out through the mask. And I just reaffirmed that I love her, that it was okay. And I knew when I got off the FaceTime that I wasn't going to make it down there in time. And that was probably going to be the last time I talked to her. And it was. At least the last time I talked to her in physical form. I got the text message later that evening. She had just passed. But she came by and saw me for just a second. Astrally. In the ethers. As she was making her transition. It had been a few minutes since I got the text message, and I think I was still in shock a little bit. Even though I'd had the sense after talking to her that morning that was going to be it. But she came by, and she, on her way through, and well, she said, she was like, I'm sorry I couldn't see you. I'm sorry I couldn't see you the way that you needed to be seen. I'm gonna go do what I need to do. So I can come help you the way that you needed me to all along. And that she loved me. Cat chaos. And then that was it. And that's when the dam broke. And that's when I actually started properly sobbing. there's a little part of me for a couple of years now that had this sneaking suspicion that the next time I made it back down to where all my relatives live, it would be because of one of my parents had died. And I really fucking hate that I was right about that. It had been probably close to a decade. Yeah, close to a decade since I had been down there. And I went by myself. My partner had to stay back home to feed the children, the fur children, and take care of them. And they had a couple of job interviews, and being totally frank, I didn't feel fully safe with them being down there. And I certainly didn't want to have to add on to dealing with anyone being disrespectful to my partner on top of everything else. So I went physically alone, but, I had plenty alongside me astrally. I had quite the energy work trip on the way down and throughout. That's a conversation for a different day. But having the energy work to do during the journey helped to balance and center me and keep me rooted in my macrocosmic self, so that I didn't get lost in the who I used to be self. Being down there really solidified to me the ancestral root wounding that seemed to be the most pervasive on both sides of the family, really. The energy of avoidance. Avoidance from conflict, from self-knowing. And I realized how interwoven that was in so much of the dynamics. And how much that was interwoven in my own patterns of self-sabotage. Ironic that this was happening as I was weaving and supporting with collective energy work around the themes of the collective abandonment wounds. I suppose the primordial and root cause of avoidance. This lie that we tell ourselves that if we don't interact, if we just avoid confronting the issue or the person or the topic, the emotion, the situation, that we're salvaging it, that we're somehow holding on to what it was or what it could have been. That we're somehow preserving that connection by avoiding it. When really it's just it's denying the potential for vibrancy. For intimacy and for complex connections. One of the self-healing and reclamation tasks while back home was to allow myself to cry freely, to allow myself to be witnessed in the full depth of my emotions. That was something that was discouraged growing up. I remember there was a point before I really started digging deep into my different layers of trauma where I didn't realize that my trauma-induced dissociation was the reason why I would joke that I felt like I was a robot sometimes and that I never cried. One of the big points of my self-healing over the last few years has actually been reclaiming my deep sense of emotion and connection and empathy and allowing myself to witness myself and sit with myself and feel into myself. And I realized while I was down there that my relatives would not have been used to seeing me in this way. While I saw tears, they were sparse and hidden. But I let myself cry when I needed to cry. I remember walking down the aisle at the end of her memorial service with tear tracks just streaming down my face. I didn't try to cover them up. I didn't try to avoid them. I didn't try to hide them. Just shoulders back, tears on full display. And I just let myself be witnessed in my complexity, in the vibrant cacophony of my emotions. I suppose in a lot of ways, this is the first time in this lifetime that death has reached me in such an intimate and visceral way. And I know many of you who have also dealt with grief know that it's a lot of times it's the confliction, the contradiction, and the emotions and the experiences that is almost the hardest to deal with, to process, and to sit with. For me, it was the contradiction of being both devastated that she was gone, and also relieved. And then the guilt and simultaneous understanding for myself. To process that there was a part of me that was relieved, even in the midst of the sorrow and the grief. Relief that she wasn't suffering anymore, because she had been miserable. So for so many years, she had stopped trying to live. Her avoidance had saturated into avoiding life, avoiding vibrancy. Relief that I would never wake up to another text message from her telling me I was going to hell. For actually being with someone who sees me in a way that they could never. So it's been 2 months. And I guess it's safe to say I am still actively grieving. Still actively processing the complicated, contradictory nature of our relationship. Two months of processing what this means for me moving forward in my life and my work. 2 months of expressing avoidance in my work, watching myself I express avoidance in my posting. In my work. Trying to find that balance between letting myself move at the pace that I need, and where's the line in which I am simply avoiding life, avoiding my vibrancy. Where's the line that is me being authentically in tune with my own rhythms? And where's the line that is simply perpetuating ancestral patterns of avoidance? I don't know that I have a perfect answer to where that line is, or what that looks like for me now. It's something I'm still actively surrendering through and processing. I know that I am subtly changing and sinking into more of me. And I know that my work is subtly shifting and expanding into more of me. And from that, you will just have to be a part of the journey and see. I guess I'll close this out by sharing the final 2 gifts my mom left for me. I didn't even know she had left for me. That I was given at the tail end of my visit down to see her one last time for the memorial. These are literal physical gifts that she had picked out for me that had never made it to me. They're 2 stuffed animals. A black cat covered in stars and witchy paraphernalia, and a stuffed unicorn covered in rainbows. Yeah. When I was handed those 2 gifts, presents that she hadn't gotten a chance to pass along to me yet, along with her jewelry and pieces of her clothing, it was those two pieces that it was those two things that perhaps almost broke me a little bit more than taking over her jewelry. These two stuffed animals who had never left their box and had been waiting. These two pieces, these two archetypal stuffed animals that both represented the parts of me that she had had the worst time seeing in me. That she'd had the most difficult time loving me for. But seeing those two gifts, it broke me because it showed me that a part of her, had seen me. Even if she hadn't really wanted to discuss it or admit it, even in her avoidance. Even as she left in death. She left those two pieces. That felt like an apology and a witnessing in one. And so, it's been 2 months to the day since my mother died. I'm not the same as I was 2 months ago. I'm perhaps a little bit more broken. But at the same time, I'm infinitely more whole. More complexly vital. More complexly vibrant. More present. And I'm going to continue evolving and expanding and meeting myself and others in their complexity and their vibrancy and challenging the wounding of avoidance and abandonment of self and abandonment of others. And life goes on. Thank you for listening. Thank you for witnessing. And I hope this meant something to you. Illuminated something for you. Well, until next time.